Hi everyone, it's Miss Turner. Welcome back to school. This is week 1 of remote learning. I hope everyone is doing well and is able to get on Schoology and is able to either access Schoology through their phone or on a computer. I posted everything for week 1. There are also additional resources that you can use. Also, if you finish the assignments early throughout the week, and it is all up to you when you do this work, and it all just depends on your schedule, okay? So this video is going to explain the PowerPoint that I posted on Schoology. I'm going to kind of go through it in depth and kind of explain a little bit more so you kind of understand the content better. It's really important to know the causes leading up to the Civil War because we will be talking about the Civil War very soon. And I know this is the event that we've been waiting for all year to learn. So if you have questions about the causes on why the North and South went and fought during the Civil War, what were the reasons why, make sure you ask me. This video is going to be in 2 parts. I'm going to kind of break it up a little bit because there is a lot of information. I'm also including additional PowerPoint slides that you aren't required to read. I'm just going to be discussing them because I think they're kind of important to explain to kind of give you some knowledge. When you're done watching this video, reading your textbook, reading through the PowerPoint slides, filling out your organizer in any way possible. There's 3 options that I posted. Then you're going to answer the 2 questions on the discussion board, okay? And that's pretty much all you have to do this week. Also, if you can check in the mental health little quiz, I post one every week just to kind of check in with you guys to see what I can do to help you, how you've been feeling, and what's something that made you smile during the week. If you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to ask. You can email me on Schoology, email me on my regular school email. You can message me on Remind. I'm here to help you. And I miss you all, and I love you all. And there is a little TikTok, little inspiration video at the end, so stay tuned. It'll be in part 2, okay? I'm going to be going through the PowerPoint that I assigned to you in week 1's folder. Again, to access week 1's folder, you go to remote learning on my course, click it, you go down to topic 7, and I put in red week 1 lesson found here. Topic 7.172, again, we're combining those for this week and next week. And then here's week 1 lesson. There's also extra resources and information if you want to look at on your own. Again, I put this folder as optional. You're not required to look at the information in this folder. This folder is meant for additional resources. So I added some short reading articles. You can look at this date in history in the History Channel. The old textbook reading might be a little bit simpler looking at than our actual textbook, if you want to check that out. And then I put additional videos to view that relates to the topics that we're discussing. But here's the folder you're going to need to click on this week. And here's the assignment for week 1. And I put everything on here below. So I have the learning target for the week. You're going to be able to describe how landmark acts, Supreme Court cases, and compromises increased sectionalism or division between the North and the South and leading up to the Civil War. The success criteria is you'll be able to describe how the country became more divided by naming and citing or using 2 historical examples. So like your textbook, PowerPoint, any articles that you find, okay? Please read the directions below. You're going to read this PowerPoint. You're going to fill out the organizer that is attached. There's several ways you can fill out this organizer. Choose any of the 3 that works best for you. They're kind of like the same organizers that we do in class. You do not need to read the entire PowerPoint. These are the slides you need to read. I'm going to go over a couple that aren't on here. That kind of gives you a little bit more background, but you don't have to read those. These are the only ones that are required, but you can explore more if you want. Also, please read or look at 7.1 and 7.2 in your textbook. If you don't have your textbook, you can go to Pearson Realize, and they split up the textbook in sections based on topic 7.1 and 7.2. Then after you're done reading the textbook PowerPoint slides, Filling out your organizer, you're going to answer the 2 following essential questions that are in the discussion board, and they're down below. This is important too. In your organizer, you do not need to fill out the following sections in 7.2, the Uncle Tom's Cabin and Preston Brooks canning of Charles Sumner. You don't have to do those. Those are optional if you want. Here's the PowerPoint. Here's the organizer. Here's the discussion question. I'm going to be putting the video link. This video is going to be right here. If you want to look at the Prezi, you can, 47172. So I'm going to download the PowerPoint. Click open. It's going to take you to PowerPoint. Alright, so here we go. I'm going to go through the slides. This again is all about how slavery is dividing the nation. This is the old textbook PowerPoint, but it does a better job going into details compared to the Prezi. So we wanted to use this instead. So I'm going to get the slides up and ready. So here we go. Alright, so the first thing we're going to talk about that wasn't in 7.1, but it was in actually 5.6, but this is pretty important to know. These are one of the compromises that the U.S. put in place that dealt with slavery. So in 1819, there were 11 free states and 11 slave states. Remember we talked about in class that it was so important that the U.S. had an equal balance of free and slave to keep everyone happy. And they wanted it to be balanced because they wanted the representation in the Senate to be equal or evenly balanced between the North and the South. And in 1819, Missouri wanted to join the U.S. as a slave state. Okay, and that caused a huge crisis. In the North, the Northern congressmen stated that if Missouri entered the Union as a slave state, it would tip the balance between free and slave. And obviously, this state joining the U.S. as a slave would favor the South more than the North. So they proposed that banning slavery in Missouri was a price that they had to pay so that they could be a part of the U.S. or be a part of the Union. That ban obviously made the South very mad, and they claimed that they had a right to expand slavery out west, the land that we purchased from the Louisiana Purchase. So in 1820, Henry Clay, who we've talked about before, he proposes this Missouri Compromise. And in this compromise, and it happened in 1820, it said that Missouri would join the Union as a slave state, but to help keep that balance, to make sure everyone is happy, Maine would join the Union as well because they were filing for pretty much a petition to be a part of the U.S. too at that time. So they would join the Union as a free state. So we would still have that equal balance. And in this proposal, they also said that Congress would draw an imaginary line across the southern border of Missouri at the latitude 3630 north line, and slavery would be permitted in the Louisiana Purchase territory south of that line. But that does not include the land that we gained after the Mexican-American War. That's just the land that we gained from the Louisiana Purchase. So this Missouri Compromise solved the short-term crisis of keeping that balance of free and slave states. So again, anything south of that 3630 north latitude line would become a slave state in the Louisiana Purchase territory. Anything north of that would be a free state. But this crisis really exposed the United States and really showed how divided the North and South were, and this growing division between the two. And it all deals with this issue of slavery. So let's go to the next slide. So the issue of slavery in the West. The big problem is, as a result of the Mexican War, the U.S. acquired a big piece of land. The Missouri Compromise only applied to the Louisiana Purchase, not this new land like I just said. The North, their argument was that
they wanted to ban slavery in these territories, one for Mexico. And there was this congressman named David Wilmot of Pennsylvania, and he created this law to ban slavery in any of the territories that was won from the Mexico War, or any land that we bought from Mexico. And they named it after him, this law, or this proposal, and it was called the Wilmot Proviso. The South, however, had a different idea. They said that Congress had no right to ban slavery in the West, that it was not fair. And the outcome of this, the House did pass the Wilmot Proviso, but the Senate defeated it. So the argument between this issue of slavery in the West, it still continued. There wasn't a set solution for this problem. And abolitionists, remember abolitionists are people that want to get rid of slavery in the U.S. and they're fighting for that belief or for that change. Some wanted to end slavery just completely right away. Some wanted it to die out slowly over time. But the abolitionists, their view on the issue of slavery in the West was that slavery should be banned throughout the country, and it is morally wrong. It is wrong to have someone enslaved and working and being treated horribly. The Southerner slaveholders obviously said, we already know this, that they should be allowed slavery in any territory. Slaves who escaped to the North should be returned to their owners. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slides to come. Some other views on this issue. The Missouri Compromise line should be extended all the way across the Mexican Cession to the Pacific Ocean. So they want that line to extend all the way out. So anything above that line, the north would be free states, and the southern part would be slave states. States also carved out the Mexican Cession should decide whether they were going to have slavery or not. So the states coming in from this territories in the Mexican Cession, they should be able to decide if their state was going to be a slavery state or not. And that is called popular sovereignty. They wanted to decide that issue of slavery by using popular sovereignty, which means that voters in a new territory should decide for themselves whether or not to allow slavery in their state. So it's up to the people's choice. So you see here on this chart, we see free on the left and slave on the right. The blue are the original 13 states, okay? And you see right here, 1820, 1821, this is when the Missouri Compromise happened, and Maine became a part as a free state, Missouri slave. And you see after Arkansas joined as a slave during that time, Michigan free, Iowa free, Florida slave, Texas slave, and Wisconsin free. So there's that equal balance still, which that was kind of keeping the tension down, to keep equal representation in the Senate, okay? But we still know at this time that the North and South were arguing with each other about this issue of slavery, and this whole idea about sectionalism was happening at that time. And sectionalism, again, is loyalty to a state or a section rather than the country as a whole. So the North, they were loyal to the North. The South was loyal to the South. It wasn't just the whole U.S. as a whole. It separated the North and the South. That's very important to know. And this whole debate about slavery and about keeping this balance erupts again when California wants to become a state in 1850. So we're going to go to the next slide. All right. So in 1849, there's still that balance, 15 slave, 15 free. And then California wants to enter the Union as a free state. And if you remember, 1849 is when the gold rush happened. And all these people are moving to California at that time from all around the world. And there was kind of chaos going on there. There wasn't exact order in California. Remember, the vigilantes were kind of taking the law into their own hands and causing some issues and executing people that they had no right to do so. So California drafted a constitution and asked to enter the Union as a free state in 1849. So if California entered the Union as a free state at that time, then the North would have a higher majority or more free states than the South. There'd be an unequal balance. So the North would have a majority in the Senate. And the South had this big fear that if California joined as a free state, then Oregon, Utah, Mexico, they're going to be joining as a free state too. And that would give the North even more power, and that's not what the South wanted. They already feared that the North was kind of disrupting the way of life, the life that it should be in the U.S., where we have slavery, and we have farms, and we're focusing on cotton. And in the North, all these immigrants are coming in, and we have factories, people working in various jobs. That was a huge threat to the South. So the South feared, again, if those states joined the Union as free states, then they would be in big trouble. So some Southerners worried that they would be outvoted in the Senate because of this, and some Southern states threatened that they would secede or remove themselves from the United States completely. And that was a worst-case scenario for everyone involved. No one wanted anyone seceding or leaving the Union. So Northerners said that California should be allowed to enter the Union as a free state because most of the territory lay north of that Missouri Compromise line that was drawn out in 1820. All right, so we're going to look at the different arguments that the Senate had about this whole slavery debate and about California coming in as a free state and messing everything up. So Henry Clay, we've talked about before, he's from Kentucky. He came up with the Missouri Compromise, and he also came up with the American system that we talked about a while ago. His whole idea about this argument was he pleaded for the North and the South to reach an agreement, and he warned that the nation could break apart if they did not come up with an agreement fast. John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, we talked about him in the past, he refused to compromise on this issue, and he insisted that slavery be allowed in all the Western territories that we gained. He demanded that the runaway slaves or fugitive slaves be returned to their owners because they were considered lost property. Remember, we had this whole discussion when we talked about the South. They viewed the enslaved people as property, not as human beings. John C. Calhoun also said that if the North did not agree to these demands, then the South is going to leave or secede the Union, which is what so many people were afraid of, that was going to happen. And Daniel Webster, he's from the Massachusetts state, he said that slavery is evil, it's going to destroy the U.S., and the breakup of the U.S. is going to be so much more, challenging, and it's going to be so hard, and it's going to be worse than this whole idea on slavery. He was afraid that the breakup of the United States was going to be worse than this whole idea on slavery, even though he thought slavery was evil. He did warn against a civil war. Civil war, you're going to need to know this definition, especially because we're going to be talking about the Civil War the rest of the school year. A civil war is a war between people in the same country, okay? So make sure you have the definition in the back of your head when we move forward. So civil war, a war between people of the same country. And Webster also thought that Northerners should be forced to return fugitive slaves to the South. And many people did not like that whole idea of returning fugitive slaves back to their owners, because we already kind of know what the situation is going to be if a fugitive slave is returned to their owner, and it is not going to be a positive thing. Alright, so we're going to kind of look at the Compromise of 1850. Remember, Clay wants this compromise to happen so we can kind of alleviate this issue about joining California as a free state. Clay at the time is old, and he's ill, and he's frail, but he still pledged that the North and South reach an agreement, and he kept fighting and debating about this issue. And John C. Calhoun, who's on the opposite side of this, says that slavery should go to the Western Territories, said that we have to do this, and the fugitive slaves have to return to their owners. John C. Calhoun was very old and ill as well, and actually the person that would speak and read his speech was a senator named James Mason from Virginia. John C. Calhoun was too ill to even talk and share his speech, so he had someone else do it. And in 1815, as this whole debate raged between North and South and this whole issue on the balance of having free and slave states, Calhoun died. And actually his last words were, the South, God knows what will become of her. So he was still in this mindset about preserving the South's way of life, expanding slavery out. Okay? And the President Taylor, he also died in 1815. He wasn't really all about this compromise. So the new president coming in 1850, President Millard Fillmore, he supported Clay's compromise, and he moved forward with this plan. An agreement finally seemed possible. And Henry Clay gave about 70 speeches in favor of this compromise that you see here on the screen. Okay? And sadly, Clay got too ill to continue, so Stephen Douglas, who is a senator from Illinois, he's very energetic, he's a very good speaker, he kind of picked it up where Clay left off, and he continued with it. And he called Clay's plan the Compromise of 1850, and he worked tirelessly on each part of this plan. And the compromise has 5 parts, which you see here. Part 1, and make California as a free state. 2, we're going to uphold this idea of popular sovereignty in New Mexico and Utah. So if these territories want to become a state, it is up to the people if they're going to be a slave or free state using popular sovereignty. And they're going to ban slave trade in Washington, D.C. And they're going to include this Fugitive Slave Act, which I'm going to talk a little bit more in the next slide. And settlers in Texas and New Mexico, the border dispute ends, so now we officially know where the border is for Texas and New Mexico. So this compromise put into place, and it looked like it was going to be a pretty good idea, but obviously we know tensions are still going to rise because of this whole issue on slavery and this whole balance between free and slave states in the Senate. So this Fugitive Slave Act law that was a part of the Compromise of 1850 had a huge impact on the U.S. So here's kind of what the Fugitive Slave Act was about. It stated that all citizens must help catch runaway slaves. Okay, so slaves that are trying to run away to the north and they're using the Underground Railroad system, all citizens must help catch these runaway slaves. And people who let fugitive slaves escape, or they kind of house them and hide them, could be fined $1,000 and be jailed. And that was a lot of money back then. It's still a lot of money today. So that was a huge fine if you were caught. And there was also special courts that were created and formed that would help handle the cases of runaway slaves or fugitive slaves. There would be no jury trials, so none of your peers would be listening in and would make a verdict. The judge would be the one that made the decision. And the judges would receive money either way if they let the slaves go and let them be free, or would return them to their owner. And the judges would get more money if they sent an accused runaway slave back to their owner. They would receive $10 for sending an accused runaway to the South, and if they were getting more than one person, they would get more money for doing that. And they'd only get $5 for setting someone free. And I know if you look, you see that's not that much of a difference, but for the judges, they, majority of the times, would send them back because that $10 was more money. And they also, the judges, just because of this $10 reward, would even send some African Americans to the South, whether they were a runaway slave or not. So they could have been a free person, and someone caught them and said, oh, they're a runaway, and they went to court. They could still send them to the South because of that whole $10 system. And here's the response to the Fugitive Slave Act. Some judges, like I said, sent African Americans to the South, whether they were runaways or not. This act made the anti-slavery or the abolitionists very upset. They felt that that they were a part of this whole slave system. If they had to catch them and bring them to these courts, then they would go back to their slave owners. This upset many Northerners because they felt that they were part of the slave system and they did not want to be a part of that, like the South was a part of the slave system. So tensions remained high because neither side, the North and South, got what it wanted because of this compromise of 1850. And as we're going to dive more into the causes of the Civil War, there's going to be more events that are going to happen that's going to divide the North and the South even further than they are right now. This compromise is a little cushion for the time being, but it doesn't really make both sides happy. And both compromise, the Missouri Compromise, kind of helped out the crisis about slavery and keeping that equal balance. The Compromise of 1850 kind of helped, but it's going to happen that the North and South are going to be having a civil war. And we already know that. We've been leading up to that since we've started school. We're waiting for this huge event. These are kind of key little points on why we are about to go to war, the North versus the South with the Civil War.